Okay, we call Chris Ross to the stage. Chris Ross is Vice President of Arthur D. Little and Senior Director of the firm Global Energy Practice. He has worked with the oil industry for 35 years in Europe, Africa, and the Americas. He currently focuses in strategy and organization assignments for major oil companies and for national oil companies. He led the Arthur D. Little team that assisted YPF in preparing that company for privatization, and he mentions a comment that he has the warmest memories of working with his counterparts at YPF in the great city of Buenos Aires.
And it's great to be back. Thank you very much. After spending time thinking about what happens in 3,000 meters of water and then another 2,500 meters underneath it, I want to sort of take us up to a different level. And if you could sort of move your eyes up a little bit and get in a helicopter and start looking down from above. What I'd like to talk about now is another way which we find helpful of looking at the future. What we found is, and I'm going to use, although I live in Houston, I'm a Brit originally, so I'm going to take you back to Shakespeare and Macbeth, who had Banquo meet with the witches on the moor. And Banquo asked, if you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak to me. Well, I can't. I don't know which grain will grow and which will not. And the way we're looking at it now is trying to look at it in a way of separating time periods. And what we'd like to look at, perhaps, is three different time periods which we portray in a way of three different lands. We have terra firma, terra nova, and terra incognita. Now, terra firma is what we know, or we think we know. Terra nova, we can see the outlines of, but we're not sure what's there. And terra incognita, we think exists, but we really know very little about it, and we're going to have to wait a while until we find out. Most people are thinking about the oil industry, as we saw yesterday, those of you at the plenary session, as a somewhat surprise-free future, where we're going to get oil demand growing at 1.5 to 2% per annum, mainly in the developing countries, that we're going to have incremental oil supplies from new deep water provinces and from heavy oil, let me not forget heavy oil. And as a result of the opening of formerly closed regions in the Middle East and Central Asia and Russia, oil prices will probably stay in a range of, let's say, $15 to $30 a barrel, and producer NOCs and major oil companies will continue to dominate the industry. That's the mental model that we're all carrying around us, and I would submit to you that it's a mental model that is firmly influenced by terra firma. The problem is, we can't actually stay in terra firma. There's stuff going out in terra nova and terra incognita, which is sending rockets back into the present. We're getting new cost structures being sent back, new business models. We are seeing disintermediation of certain types of player and new types of partnership going on. In short, new sources of value are being invented, and the sources of value that we think are going to be invented in the future are influencing today. So let's go back and see how this model worked a little while ago. I think many people in this room were in the industry in 1980. And remember what we saw there. This is the world we knew in 1980. It was called stagflation. That was inflation with stagnation. The Japanese miracle was the dominant economic model. We had, as we normally do, Arab-Israeli conflict. We have Iranian hostage crisis. OPEC was very powerful. but there was basically an attitude of constrained supply and rising oil prices. Well, that was 1980. Out in Terra Nova, though we didn't know it very well, was a world of price stability where inflation had disappeared in, shall we say, in the US and in Europe anyway. We had high US deficits, we had perestroika coming from Russia, US military superiority, personal computers. I remember in 1980 I had a color computer from Radio Shack. I think it was 64K capacity. I was very proud of it. By 1990 we all had personal computers. We had no idea that deep water could become an issue. We didn't really have an idea in 1980 what the potential of Alaska and the North Sea were. And then as we looked further forward, how many of us really thought that the internet would exist in 1980? I think virtually no one. Nobody would have thought the US would be running a budget surplus. Very few people would have seen the collapse of the Soviet Union. Very few people would have understood that we would in fact be finding oil in 3,000 meters of water. People couldn't have imagined privatization. Back in 1980, the last thing on YPF's mind was privatization, I would hazard a guess. We didn't know about electricity decontrol. We certainly wouldn't have believed that OPEC would have opened up to foreign investment. Nobody had heard of sustainable development. Global warming wasn't an issue. And non-government organizations were barely heard of. So it's a pretty sorry track record if we put ourselves back in 1980 about what we knew and what we thought we knew and what actually happened. So when I see somebody come up with a surprise-free future, I said that would be a real surprise. So what don't we know today? Well, starting from where we left off, with lots of deep water growth and sustainable development and global warming and ubiquitous NGOs, what might happen in the next 10 years? Well, one thing we do know is that the OECD population will be aging. We also know, if we believe the United Nations, that the highest growth rate countries are going to be in Africa and the Middle East. And in fact, over the next 15 years, very nearly 50% of the world's population growth will be in Africa and the Middle East. And that, to me, suggests that there are going to be some problems in some of those countries. E-business is going to have a big impact. We've got Arctic gas. We've heard about GTL today. We haven't heard about today fuel cells, but fuel cells are becoming, the costs are coming down very fast. We've got very low sulfur products. We've heard about those from GTL, biotech and renewables. And then when we go out a little bit further, maybe we'll have truly global institutions. Manufacturing in space, M-commerce, device-to-device communications, what I call intelligent artificial intelligence. We've had a lot of not very intelligent artificial intelligence, but it's time for intelligent AI now. MEMS, which is microeconomic magnetic systems, robotics, hydrogen economy, nanotechnology. All of these things are out there. We think they're out there. We don't know which will be commercial. So as we go forward with this sort of frame in mind of three different lands, what do companies have to do? Well, in the near term, in terra firma, they have to perform. It's all about performance. In Terra Nova, we talk about growth, and in Terra Incognita, we talk about option creation. And as I listened to the earlier speakers, I felt this model fit. With both in the Faja and in deep water off Brazil, we're talking about growth. We're talking about growth, dealing with new challenges, but basically talking about growth. But in both areas, we're starting laying down options to enable us to go further. Laying down options, whether it be new technologies to convert the oil at the reservoir, or laying down options to get to be able to produce in ever deeper water. Now, I did promise I would talk about oil prices, and here it is. Recognizing that like I say, I do not know what the seeds of time, where they're going to be planted or how they'll grow. But this is what most people are thinking about in their mental models. Oil prices more or less the same, growing demand, decent prices. There's a future out there which I think the oil industry needs to be a little bit concerned about, and it's one where technologies really start taking off. And I think if we look out to the technologies that I mentioned in Terra Incognita about nanotechnology and robotics and new materials and electromechanical systems, fuel cells and the like, as those things come into the market, demand for our normal hydrocarbons could well start declining. As a colleague, an ex-colleague, Robert Mabro once said, the world the Stone Age did not end because the world ran out of stones. And the oil era will not end because the world runs out of oil, but it will be because we come up with better technologies. So that's a scenario that I think we have to take seriously as we look forward. Then we have the OPEC scenario, the one that we heard at lunch yesterday, which OPEC is trying to create, which will result in lower demand than perhaps the surprise-free case, but higher prices. And then finally we have the 1970s all over again with recurrent prices, very high prices followed by very low prices, which is, as we've found in this industry, an impossible future to deal with and to be avoided at all costs. So I don't know which of these scenarios are going to happen, but what I do know is that they're all possible, and I also know that we have to start thinking about how we're going to manage our business to deal with it, and this is a good model, we think, for doing that. What we have to do in terra firma is to work out how to enhance our performance through technology. That means lower costs, shorter cycle times, safer, better, faster, cheaper. In Terra Nova, we need to improve our access to resources through differentiated competencies. We need to develop natural gas. There's no question that that is the transition fuel, I think, between the oil era and renewables. And then in Terra Incognita we need to think about energy services. One of the things I think that the oil industry has a problem with is as long as it is peddling products, it's going to be in permanent conflict with people who don't believe that we should be burning so many fossil fuels. When the oil industry gets involved in energy solutions, then I think we have a much better dialogue with that particular population. New energy forms, new energy uses, new technologies, all of these things, we have to start putting our options down in the future to develop them. It is my belief that there is a natural development in the oil industry towards what some people call decarbonization. As we have moved from coal to oil, and we will move on through natural gas into energy solutions and renewables. And there's also a driver which I think is increasing the complexity of organizational models, which I will loosely call e-business, but it seems to me that the ability of people to communicate at long distance in ever more complete ways enables different types of organization, different forms of partnership, with the result that organizations will move from traditional through to more virtual and possibly even fragmented organizations. I believe we heard today from Petrobras the complexity of the partnerships that are being laid down at this time, which are enabled by the speed and quality of modern communications. That can only get deeper and more complex as time goes on. So as I look back and think about the traditional strategic challenge which was on the edge of terra firma and terra nova, I believe that actually today the strategic challenge is not there. It's on the edge of terra nova and terra incognita, and can only be dealt with scenarios and options. And that is how we are working with our clients at this moment to deal with strategy in a very complex and very uncertain oil price environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Well, we are open now for questions from the audience.
It may be time to get underground again. Okay.
Eduardo Barreiro is not around.
Sure.
Can you comment on the technology associated with fuel cells, and how do you think it will be, somehow becoming really a standard in the next 20 years?
Yes. First of all, let me sort of admit to a vested interest. Our company has an investment in a fuel cell manufacturer, so I'm perhaps a bigger advocate of fuel cells than I should be. Because of new materials, the costs of fuel cells are coming down very rapidly. Fuel cells, as you know, is an electrochemical device which takes hydrogen and oxygen and produces electricity and heat and water. Therefore, it's a system that is much loved by environmentalists. It will need a boost from policy. At the moment, they're not economic compared to in transportation uses. However, in the US particularly, the need for quality power is now very high indeed because of computer applications. People cannot accept brownouts, interruptions in power use. So people are looking now for more and more reliable forms of backup generation. Traditionally, the backup generators were diesel-fired, and those, of course, on a small scale are quite bad polluters, unless we use the GTL that we were product that we're doing. Fuel cell is a very, very good option for backup stationary power. The capital cost is a little bit high, but the running costs are quite low. The way that we're conceiving it is with a small hydrogen generator in advance of the fuel cell, and then the fuel cell takes the hydrogen with oxygen to make electricity. So we're very optimistic that that we will get into mass production in fuel cells within the next 3 or 4 years. The costs will come down significantly, with the first use being in backup power generation. First, initially in places like California, which has got totally chaotic electricity regulations, and then other places such as India and China, which also have totally chaotic electricity regulations.
Any other question? What's there?
Yes,
If we are right now in terra firma, you did not give any time scale for the terra nova or terra incognita. I think in your first example you used 1980, 1990, and 2000 with 10 years of interval. Are you going to apply the same formulation, or the time scale is different?
It's a good question. I don't know. To be quite honest, I don't know the best way to use my own model. I think 10-year intervals are sort of convenient. You know, we've got 5 fingers on each hand, and we can add up them fairly easily. So I think 10 years is quite a good interval. What I find just compelling is just how little we knew back in 1980, and I'm sure that in 2020 all sorts of new things will have happened that we can't imagine today, which will transform totally the both the supply and the demand for energy. I think Venezuela will solve the heavy oil problem by 2020, if not before. Goodness knows how deep Petrobras will be by 2020. But at the same time, we have fuel cells at the other end, and we know that China, for example, can't, or India, both of which have more than 1 billion people, cannot each use 5 times as much oil as the US. It doesn't work. So there's got to be different technologies at the end use end. So I would say let's use 10-year intervals, but let's realize that in 20 years the surprise-free future is totally infeasible.
Right. Just a few questions, a few words. Deregulation of electricity in Europe, for instance, open market shortly. What's your view? Secondly, greenhouse effect. And the taboo word, we never spoke of nuclear energy.
I didn't get
the taboo word, nuclear energy, also from the batteries. Mix those 3 words, and what is your view with those 3 words?
Well, I think electricity in Europe is on the way to decontrol. I think it's Terra Nova, though, because it's going to take a little while to get there. On greenhouse, I think, you know, my own view is that it's not so much greenhouse thing, it's a matter of aesthetics. You know, if we can do stuff without emitting stuff, then we're better off, don't you think? So I suspect if it's not greenhouse, it'll be something else. That we are going to have to figure out ways for doing stuff, raising people's standard of living with less and less inputs and less emissions. So at the moment, greenhouse is the excuse. I don't understand the science. It's too complicated. I don't think anybody does. I think because it is so complicated. And the third one is nuclear energy. Back in 1980, that was the answer, right? Surtout en France, hein? Yes, absolutely, especially in France. And it's a very good technology, but everybody's frightened about the radioactive waste, and that we haven't yet come up with the answer to that. If you were logical, which being French you are, you would have to say there ought to be a place for nuclear energy in the future balance. I'm not sure where logic fits in the model there.
Any other question? Okay, Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bueno, invitamos al ingeniero Marcelo Guiscardo, que nos va a hacer una presentación sobre Drilling and Completion, perforación y terminación. Marcelo es actualmente presidente de San Antonio y vicepresidente de E&P Services de Pride International, una compañía internacional de perforación con headquarters en Houston, Texas. Él ha estado a la cabeza de San Antonio desde abril del año pasado. Marcelo se graduó con honores como ingeniero civil en la Universidad de Rutgers College of Engineering en 1979. Luego ingresó a Exxon Corporation, donde obtuvo posiciones de creciente responsabilidad en el negocio de E&P, exploración y producción. En 1993, siendo Production Advisor para el Medio Oriente, Tailandia, la Costa de Marfil y Francia, se unió al equipo de Pepe Stensoro en YPF. Allí se desempeñó como vicepresidente de exploración y producción, siendo hasta 1998 y Vice President de New Ventures durante 1999. Bueno, adelante, Marcelo.
Muchas gracias. Quisiera comenzar agradeciéndole a LACPEC la oportunidad de poder hablar con todos ustedes. Me pidieron que la presentación se hiciera en inglés porque es el idioma oficial, así que voy a cambiar de idioma. What I'm going to be talking about today, if this thing works, it does, I don't work, is looking for efficiencies in the recovery of oil and gas resources. We have seen very interesting presentations today from very heavy oil to deep water, and we just got a great look at what the price of oil is going to be, which we don't know, anywhere from $5 to about 50. That's the range I was able to see. So to me, that goes right into what I'm talking about here, because regardless of the price of oil, we'll have to be efficient in being able to get it out. And we'll have to find ways in which the whole concept of how the companies go together will work. I have then a very terra firma type of outlook of the energy from 2001 and 2020. Then I'll be talking about project management and technology, which to me are the basis upon which we'll have to get to this efficiency we're looking for. Then I'll present two specific cases in which I can see the beginnings of what we see is the future. And if you saw Chris Ross's presentation and those rockets going into terra firma and kind of breaking it out, I see the other way around, that we're getting on those rockets and going to the future. And then we'll have some conclusions. Well, I'm not going to spend much time on this because I've seen it in 3 different presentations already. So what we're seeing here is, if you look at this curve, is just energy, and this curve is dollars. What we're saying is that worldwide, if you look at the acquisition power of everybody, and you see the energy generated, as years go on from 1970 to 1997 or 2000, it goes in about 3.1% per year increase, and it's more on the OECD countries, it's less on the rest of the world. Then if you look at where we're going to get this energy, and really, you know, you can talk about all of the technologies that we've been seeing here, you still see that, if you believe these models anyway, we're still going to have oil and gas being about 70% of that, growing about 2%. So right there you see a gap of about from 3 to 2%, 3 demand, 2% of supply. Going back to now to the OECD countries, we see that the oil demand is about 50%, and those countries have about 10% of the supply. So where is that oil and gas is going to come from? In the oil side, this is another way of looking at the same portion. We see that, again, from 1997, we go from about 50 to 70% utilization, and we double the requirements for gas. So we see that as a big opportunity. We see that as an opportunity and challenge that affects both producers, or the oil and gas companies, and contractors, which is service companies who are trying to provide the answers in conjunction with them. All comes down to how efficient are you in being able to respond to these challenges. I mean, you have to continually look at making more efficient the recovery of these resources. We see three drivers. One is macroeconomic low-cost energy. We are going to be required to lower our cost of energy, and you know, fuel cells will go in and all of the other, but people will want it clean, cheap, and ready. So the second one is increasing returns. I mean, we as the energy industry will want some type of return. Otherwise, shareholders are not going to buy our shares, and this thing is going south. So we need to lower the cost. We need to still make money as an industry. And part of what we're saying, you can call it greenhouse, or you can call it whatever you want, but the users will want cleaner and cleaner energy. And so I put here benign environment, but actually it's trying to produce less and less problems.